The German soldiers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Standing before them was a British officer with a medieval longbow, an arrow nocked and ready. Behind him, bagpipes echoed across the battlefield like a ghost from another century. That officer was Jack Churchill, and he was about to change everything you thought you knew about modern warfare. Most soldiers in World War II carried guns. Jack Churchill carried principles. And on this morning in 1943, those principles were about to collide with Nazi Germany in the most spectacular way possible. But why bring a bow and arrow to a gunfight? Why choose a sword over a submachine gun? How did this man's refusal to embrace modern weapons end up saving more lives than any rifle ever could? The answer begins in 1940, when a single telegram changed Jack Churchill's life forever. Jack Churchill was playing violin when the knock came. September 15, 1940, and the Battle of Britain raged overhead. The telegram was brief: "Your country needs you. Report immediately." Most men would have grabbed a rifle. Jack Churchill grabbed his grandfather's cavalry sword, his tournament longbow, and inherited bagpipes. His wife Dorothy watched in bewilderment. "Jack, this isn't the Middle Ages. The Germans have tanks and machine guns." Jack paused, looking at her with steel-gray eyes. At 34, years of archery, climbing, and training had forged him into something between modern soldier and ancient warrior. "Dorothy," he said, "any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." It wasn't bravado or madness. It was deeper than that. Jack had grown up hearing ancestor stories, men who fought with honor, faced enemies eye to eye, never hid behind technology when courage sufficed. In his mind, warfare wasn't just about killing. It was proving civilization could triumph over barbarism, but something else drove his decision. His brothers Thomas and Robert were also heading to war. Thomas would join commandos, Robert the Royal Navy. All three Churchill brothers fighting the same enemy. Jack had made a private vow: he would show the world there was still room for honor in modern warfare. One man with courage could make a difference against impossible odds. What he didn't know was this decision would soon put him face to face with 42 German soldiers, armed with nothing but a sword and surprise. The first time Jack Churchill killed a man with a bow and arrow, it was almost by accident. May 1940, British forces retreating through France. Germans had broken through, panic spreading faster than wildfire. Abandoned vehicles, scattered equipment, hollow eyes of defeated soldiers everywhere. Jack's Manchester regiment covered the retreat, a suicide mission disguised as strategic withdrawal. German advance too fast, too overwhelming. They could only buy time for Dunkirk evacuation. That's when Jack saw him, a German sniper in a church tower, 200 yards away. Already picked off 3 British soldiers, lining up his 4th shot. Jack's men carried rifles, but range too great for accuracy. Smart thing, call artillery or find another route. But Jack Churchill had never been particularly interested in smart things. Instead, he pulled out his longbow. Sergeant Thompson stared in disbelief. "Sir, what the hell are you doing?" "What needs to be done, Sergeant?" Jack knocked a hunting broadhead, drew bowstring to his ear. The familiar tension that won archery championships. Wind calm. Distance manageable. Target stationary. He released. Arrow flew in perfect arc, covering 200 yards in 2 seconds. Struck the German sniper in the chest, and the man tumbled from the tower like a cut marionette. Deafening silence followed. Jack's men stared as if he'd performed magic. "Bloody hell, sir," Thompson whispered. "You actually did it." But Jack wasn't celebrating. He was thinking about the men he'd killed, someone's son, brother, someone who would never go home. Bow instead of bullet didn't make it less final. Still, word spread through British forces like wildfire. Mad Jack Churchill, they called him. The officer who brought medieval weapons to modern war. But this was just the beginning. Jack Churchill was about to volunteer for something that would test his unconventional approach in unimaginable ways. After Dunkirk, Jack Churchill made a defining decision: he volunteered for the newly formed British Commandos. These weren't regular soldiers. They were raiders, saboteurs, infiltrators, men trained to strike behind enemy lines and disappear like ghosts. Dangerous work with life expectancy measured in weeks, perfect for someone like Jack Churchill. Commando training at Achnacarry in Scotland was designed to break ordinary men and forge elite warriors. Brutal instructors, harsh conditions, catastrophic failure rate. For Jack, it felt like coming home. While recruits struggled with knife fighting and silent killing, Jack was in his element. Mountain climbing since teenage years. Bow hunting since childhood. Swordplay since university. But during a night training exercise, Jack truly shocked his instructors. Scenario: infiltrate mock German position, eliminate sentries silently, retrieve intelligence. Most commandos used knives or garrots. Jack Churchill used his grandfather's broadsword. He moved through darkness like a shadow, black painted face invisible against Scottish night. First, a German sentry never knew what hit him, smoking cigarette one moment, on ground with wooden sword at throat the next. Second sentry heard something, turned to see figure emerging from mist. Before raising rifle, Jack's sword was at his neck. "You're dead," Jack whispered in perfect German, another skill from extensive pre-war travels. But what happened next truly set Jack apart. Approaching final objective, Jack did something unexpected, pulled out bagpipes and began playing. Sound echoed across Scottish hills like battle cry from another age. Haunting, defiant, absolutely unmistakable. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Vaughan came running. Found Jack Churchill standing over mock German position, sword in one hand, bagpipes in other, grinning like he was having the time of his life. "Churchill!" Vaughan barked. "What the hell? This is supposed to be stealth." Jack lowered bagpipes, looked at commanding officer with complete sincerity. "Sir, I always play pipes before action. Good for morale." "Whose morale? Ours or the enemy's?" "Well," Jack replied thoughtfully, "depends which side you're on." Vaughan stared, then began laughing. He realized something important: conventional thinking would never win this war. They needed men who could think outside the box, confuse and demoralize enemies in ways no manual described. They needed Mad Jack Churchill. But Vaughan didn't know Jack's unconventional methods were about to be tested in the most dangerous way possible. December 27, 1941. Norwegian coast shrouded in freezing fog. Somewhere in that mist, 4 German destroyers anchored in supposed safety. Operation Archery: destroy German naval assets, gather intelligence, withdraw before reinforcements. But intelligence missed something crucial. German garrison 3 times larger than expected. Jack Churchill stood on HMS Prince Charles, checking equipment. His commando unit among first to hit beach, sword, secured left hip, blade hair-splitting sharp, longbow, strung, ready, 24 hunting arrows in quiver, bagpipes, carefully wrapped, protected from salt spray, rifle, present, though more for appearances. His men watched with admiration and bewilderment. Months training with Mad Jack, still couldn't believe their commanding officer's warfare approach. "Sir," asked Private Morrison from Glasgow, "really going to play those pipes when we hit beach?" Jack looked at the young soldier and smiled. "Morrison, know why Highland regiments played pipes before battle?" "Boost morale, sir." "Partly. But mostly to let enemy know they were coming. If confident enough to announce presence with music, sends clear message, you're not afraid." Morrison nodded slowly. "What message are we sending today, sir?" Jack's smile turned predatory. "That we're not just coming to fight them. We're coming to humiliate them." 0200 hours, landing craft hit Viexo beaches. German sentries caught completely off guard. Who expected British raid in Norwegian winter? Jack Churchill firstman off boat, sword drawn, bagpipes slung across shoulder. Behind him, commandos spread in perfect formation, advancing through snow like hunting wolves. First German position, machine gun nest overlooking harbor. 3 soldiers, warm and comfortable, probably thinking about home and hot coffee. Jack approached silently, moving shadow to shadow with natural-born hunter skill. 10 feet away, stood up, drew bow, knocked arrow. First German soldier died without sound. Second turned just in time to see Jack Churchill emerging from darkness, sword in hand, looking like something from Viking saga. Never had chance to scream. Third managed hands on rifle, but Jack already moving. Sword took him across chest in one clean stroke. Suddenly machine gun nest silent, but here Jack Churchill did something that would become legendary among commandos. Instead of quietly moving to next objective, pulled out bagpipes and began playing the March of the Cameron Men. Sound echoed across harbor like battle cry from another century. Every German soldier within mile radius suddenly knew exactly where British forces located. His own men thought he'd lost his mind, but Jack Churchill had calculated something others hadn't: fear. And as bagpipe sound filled Norwegian night, Jack Churchill was about to face his greatest challenge yet. South WWII village supposed to be lightly defended. Intelligence suggested maybe dozen German soldiers, probably reserves. Intelligence was wrong. Jack Churchill's commando unit moving through snow-covered streets began realizing they were walking into something bigger. German voices from multiple buildings. Machine gun positions at key intersections. This wasn't light garrison, this was fortress. "Sir," whispered Sergeant Thompson behind overturned cart, "need to pull back. Too many of them." Jack studied layout through binoculars. Thompson right, outnumbered 4 to 1. Smart thing, withdraw, call naval support, try different approach, but Jack Churchill had never been interested in smart things. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "how many arrows left?" Thompson blinked. "Sir. My arrows." "How many?" 18, sir." "But, and how many men do we have?" 7, sir, including yourself." Jack nodded slowly, mind working through calculations that would seem insane to any reasonable strategist. "Right then. Here's what we're going to do." What happened next became one of the most audacious military actions of World War II. Jack Churchill didn't sneak around German positions. Didn't wait for reinforcements. Didn't call artillery support. Instead, walked straight up Main Street of South WWII, playing bagpipes at full volume, sound unmistakable, impossible to ignore, absolutely terrifying to German soldiers who'd never encountered anything like it. Bagpipes didn't belong in modern warfare. They belonged in ancient Highland battles, in Celtic warrior stories, in nightmares about savage British tribesmen. First German soldier investigating came around corner to find Jack Churchill standing middle of street, still playing pipes, sword at side, bow in hand. Moment, neither man moved. German trying to process what he was seeing. Jack waiting for exactly the right moment. When it came, Jack dropped bagpipes, drew bow, put arrow through German's chest before man could even raise rifle. Then something extraordinary happened. Instead of running or taking cover, Jack Churchill began advancing up street, shooting arrows and drawing sword whenever enemies got close. His men, inspired by leader's impossible courage, followed, providing covering fire. But most incredible moment came when Jack rounded corner and found himself face to face with 42 German soldiers rushing to investigate bagpipe sound. Split second, nobody moved. German stared at lone British officer with sword and bow, trying to understand how someone armed with medieval weapons had penetrated defenses and killed comrades. Jack Churchill stared back, calculating odds so stacked against him they were almost comical. Then he did something that still defies military logic. He smiled. "Gentlemen," he said in perfect German, "I believe you're surrounded." Complete lie. Jack Churchill had 6 men behind him, facing 42 enemy soldiers with modern weapons. But he said it with such absolute confidence, such complete conviction. Something remarkable happened. German soldiers hesitated. And that moment of hesitation, Jack Churchill raised sword, pointed directly at German officer in charge, said something that would echo through military history: "Surrender now, and I give you my word as British officer that you'll be treated according to Geneva Convention. Refuse, and I'll demonstrate why my ancestors conquered half the world with weapons exactly like these." German officer looked at Jack's sword, then at Jack's face, then at bodies of his men who had already fallen to arrows and steel. He made decision that probably saved his life and his men's lives. we surrender. But this victory was about to lead Jack Churchill into an even more dangerous situation. 3 months after WWII raid, Jack Churchill received a letter that changed everything. Grey February morning 1942, delivered to temporary quarters in Scotland while commando unit prepared for next mission. Envelope bore Royal Navy official seal. Jack knew immediately what it contained. Hands shook slightly as he opened it. Dear Mr. Churchill, deep regret to inform you of HMS Jaguar loss during action against enemy submarines in North Atlantic. Your brother, Sub-Lieutenant Robert Churchill, was among crew members who went down with ship. He died serving his country with honor. Admiralty extends deepest condolences during this difficult time. Jack read letter 3 times before words truly sank in. Robert, youngest of 3 Churchill brothers, was gone. Kid who used to follow Jack around as child, begging to be taught archery and swordplay, would never come home. He sat on narrow bunk long time, staring at letter, thinking about last conversation with Robert. Met briefly in London before Robert shipped out, youngest brother so excited about first real naval assignment. Don't worry about me, Jack, Robert had said with cocky confidence of 20-year-old who thought he was immortal. I'll be hunting U-boats while you're playing with your medieval toys. Now Robert was at Atlantic bottom, and Jack was alone with grief and rage, but another letter waiting, this one from middle brother Thomas. Jack, know you've heard about Robert by now. Can't tell you how sorry I am. We both love that kid more than life itself, but need you to know something else. My commando unit being sent to Yugoslavia to work with resistance fighters. Dangerous work, probably one-way mission. If something happens to me, that makes you the last Churchill brother. Don't do anything stupid to avenge us. Don't take unnecessary risks. Someone needs to survive this war to remember what we fought for. Your brother, Thomas. Jack stared at both letters for hours, feeling responsibility weight settling on shoulders like lead blanket. He was now guardian of family memory, keeper of their legacy. Most men would have taken Thomas's advice. Been more careful, cautious, interested in survival than glory. Jack Churchill decided to do exactly the opposite. If brothers had given lives for this war, then he would make sure their sacrifice meant something. Would fight harder, take bigger risks, show enemy that Churchill brothers weren't finished yet, but first, needed to honor Robert's memory in only way he knew how. That night, Jack climbed highest hill near training camp, pulled out bagpipes, played Amazing Grace under Scottish stars. Sound carried miles across countryside, haunting lament for brother lost in war that seemed to devour everyone it touched. When finished playing, Jack made vow that would drive him for rest of conflict. Every German soldier he faced would know Churchill name. Every battle he fought would be testament to Robert's courage and Thomas's sacrifice. He would become more than just Mad Jack Churchill. He would become a legend. But legends are forged in fire, and Jack Churchill was about to face his greatest test. September 1943. Salerno, Italy, Operation Avalanche, supposed beginning of end for Nazi Germany. Allied forces land Italian coast, establish beachhead, begin long march toward Rome. Massive undertaking involving thousands of ships, tens of thousands of men, enough firepower to level small country, but sometimes fate of massive operations comes down to small actions by individual soldiers. Jack Churchill stood on HMS Laffery, watching Italian coast emerge from pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere in those hills, German artillery crews probably drinking coffee, preparing for another quiet occupation day. They were about to get very rude awakening. Jack's commando unit assigned what briefing officers politely called diversionary action. Plain English, create enough noise and confusion to draw German attention from main landing beaches, essentially suicide mission with better public relations. Sir, asked Private Morrison, somehow survived every mission since Norway, what's the plan? Jack checked equipment. Sword, bow, bagpipes, small pack of explosive charges for destroying German installations. Plan simple, Morrison. Land on beach, march inland, capture German artillery position causing problems for naval forces. Morrison nodded. How many Germans expected, sir? Intelligence suggests about 50 men, well-armed in prepared positions. How many of us? 12. Morrison quiet. Sir, with respect, those aren't very good odds. Jack Churchill smiled, same predatory smile that had become trademark. Morrison, you're thinking wrong. Those 50 Germans trapped in position with only one way out. We have entire Italian countryside to maneuver. Who really has advantage? Vintage Jack Churchill logic, take impossible situation and make it sound like opportunity. Landing went smoothly at first. Jack's commandos hit beach 0500 hours, moved inland without detection, reached German artillery position as sun came up over Mediterranean. Then things got complicated. Intelligence reports wrong again. Instead of 50 Germans, position held nearly 200 soldiers, multiple artillery pieces, enough machine gun nests to hold off battalion. Any reasonable commander would have withdrawn, radioed for support, waited for better odds. Jack Churchill pulled out bagpipes and began playing Scotland the Brave. He was going to capture fortified position defended by 200 men using nothing but medieval weapons and sheer audacity. October 1944. Somewhere in occupied Germany, Jack Churchill had been traveling for 3 weeks, moving mostly at night, living off stolen food and rainwater, gradually working his way toward Allied lines. He'd lost 20 pounds, his clothes were in tatters, and he hadn't had a proper night's sleep since escaping from Sachsenhausen, but he was still alive, still free, and still moving west. The hardest part wasn't avoiding German patrols or finding food. The hardest part was the knowledge of what he'd left behind. During his months in captivity, Jack had received news that haunted his dreams. His brother Thomas was confirmed dead, killed while fighting with Yugoslav partisans. Robert was dead. Thomas was dead. Jack was the last of the Churchill brothers, and he was walking through enemy territory with nothing but his wits and a German uniform he'd stolen from a supply depot. He thought about them constantly as he moved through the German countryside. Robert, the youngest, so eager to prove himself worthy of the family name. Thomas, the middle brother, always trying to outdo his older siblings. Both gone, both buried in foreign soil, both mourned by a family that was rapidly running out of sons. The responsibility of survival weighed on Jack's shoulders like a physical burden. He wasn't just escaping for himself anymore, he was carrying the memory of his brothers, the honor of his family, the obligation to tell their story. It was that sense of responsibility that kept him moving when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. When he wanted to rest, he thought about Robert. When he was tempted to surrender, he thought about Thomas. When he felt like giving up, he remembered that someone needed to survive to remember them. On October 15, 1944, Jack reached a small town near the German-Swiss border. He'd been walking for 18 hours straight, and his stolen uniform was drawing suspicious glances from the few civilians on the street. He needed food, rest, and civilian clothes. But most importantly, he needed help from someone he could trust. That's when he remembered the violin. During his imprisonment, Jack had mentioned to several guards that he'd been a professional musician before the war. It wasn't entirely true, he was an accomplished amateur, but it had earned him respect and, occasionally, small favors. Now, standing outside a small church in occupied Germany, Jack made a decision that was pure mad Jack Churchill. He was going to walk inside and offer to play for Sunday service. The pastor, Father Mueller, was preparing for evening prayers when a stranger in a tattered German uniform approached him. "Father," Jack said in careful German, "I'm a musician, traveling through your area. I wondered if you might need someone to play violin for your service." Father Mueller looked at this ragged soldier suspiciously. There was something about the man's accent, his bearing, his eyes that didn't seem quite right. "You're not German," the priest said quietly. Jack's heart stopped. After weeks of careful deception, had he finally made a fatal mistake? "You're British," Father Mueller continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack stood perfectly still, calculating his options. He could run, but he was exhausted and probably wouldn't get far. He could fight, but he was unarmed and facing a man who could raise the alarm with a single shout. Instead, he decided to trust. "Yes," Jack said simply. Father Mueller looked around the empty church, then back at Jack. How long since you've eaten? 3 days. Come with me. That night, in the basement of a German church, Father Müller fed Jack Churchill bread and soup while they discussed music, theology, and the nature of war. Why do you help me? Jack asked. I'm your enemy. Father Müller smiled sadly. Young man, I serve a God who commanded us to love our enemies. Besides, he added, any man who offers to play violin in church can't be entirely evil. It was an act of kindness that would change both their lives forever. November 1944. Allied lines, somewhere in France, when Jack Churchill stumbled into an American forward position after 5 weeks behind enemy lines, the GI on guard duty initially refused to believe what he was seeing. I'm Lieutenant Colonel John Churchill, British Army, Jack said in English for the first time in months. I need to speak to your commanding officer immediately. The American soldier, a kid from Ohio who looked like he'd never been in a real firefight, stared at Jack's stolen German uniform and emaciated appearance. Sure you are, buddy. And I'm General Patton. It took 3 hours, 2 intelligence officers, and a radio call to London before Jack's identity was confirmed. When word finally came back from British command, the American officers couldn't quite believe it. Mad Jack Churchill, the commando who fought with medieval weapons, had escaped from a Nazi concentration camp and walked across occupied Germany to freedom. The story spread through the Allied forces like wildfire, boosting morale at a time when the war seemed to be dragging on forever. But Jack Churchill wasn't interested in being celebrated. He was interested in getting back to the fight. Sir, he told the British liaison officer who came to debrief him, I need to be reassigned to an active unit immediately. Colonel, with respect, you've been through an ordeal that would break most men. Don't you think you deserve some rest? Jack's eyes went cold. Major, my brothers died in this war. My men died while I was in prison. Every day I spend resting is another day the enemy gets to live. I didn't escape from Sachsenhausen to sit in a comfortable chair and write reports. Within a week, Jack Churchill was back in action with a new commando unit, preparing for operations in the final push toward Germany. His new men had heard the stories about Mad Jack, but seeing him in person was something else entirely. Despite months in captivity and his harrowing escape, Jack still insisted on carrying his grandfather's sword. He'd somehow acquired a new longbow during his journey to Allied lines. And he'd managed to find bagpipes. Sir, asked his new sergeant, a veteran named Williams, is it true you captured 42 Germans with just a sword? Close, Jack replied, checking the edge of his blade. It was actually a sword and a bow. And the number was 42 prisoners, not casualties. Williams nodded slowly. And the bagpipes? Essential for maintaining proper military bearing. Sir. Jack looked at his sergeant with complete seriousness. Williams, any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. Any officer who goes into action without his bagpipes is simply unprepared. It was vintage Jack Churchill logic, and his men were beginning to understand why the stories about Mad Jack had spread throughout the British Army. But Jack's final test as a warrior was still ahead of him. On March 24, 1945, just weeks before the end of the war in Europe, Jack Churchill's commando unit was assigned to capture a strategic bridge across the Rhine River. The bridge was heavily defended by German forces who knew the war was nearly over and were determined to make the Allies pay for every mile of German soil. It should have been a textbook assault, artillery preparation, coordinated infantry attack, air support. Instead, Jack Churchill decided to do something that would cap his legendary military career in typically unconventional fashion. He was going to capture the bridge by walking across it alone, playing his bagpipes. March 24, 1945. Rhine River, Germany. German soldiers defending bridge couldn't believe what they saw. British officer walking toward them playing bagpipes, completely alone, as if leading parade instead of conducting military assault. Behind him, Allied forces massed for attack. Artillery positioned. Aircraft circling. But this lone figure with medieval instruments seemed oblivious to enemy bullets. German lieutenant raised binoculars. "That's Mad Jack Churchill," he told his sergeant. "I've heard the stories. What do we do?" Lieutenant watched Jack Churchill advance another 50 yards, still playing bagpipes, still seemingly invulnerable to modern warfare reality. "Nothing," he said finally. "That man survived 4 years of war, captured hundreds of German soldiers, escaped from Sachsenhausen, walked across occupied Germany to freedom. He's either insane or blessed by God. Either way, I'm not the man to stop him." As Jack reached Bridge Center, still playing "Scotland the Brave," German defenders began abandoning positions. Some running. Others laying down weapons. Few actually applauding. They recognized something in this lone figure, last representative of older warfare, when men fought with honor instead of hatred, when battles were personal rather than industrial, when individual courage could still change history. When Jack finally reached German side, found positions abandoned except one young lieutenant standing with hands raised. "I surrender," German officer said in careful English. Jack stopped playing, looked at young men with respect. "What's your name, son?" "Lieutenant Hans Müller, sir." "Well, Lieutenant Müller, you and your men fought bravely. Should be proud." "Thank you, sir." Jack nodded toward abandoned positions. "How many men?" 87, sir." "All withdrew rather than fight?" "Yes, sir." Jack Churchill smiled, familiar predatory smile. "Smart lads. War's almost over anyway." 3 weeks later, Germany surrendered, World War II in Europe ended. Jack Churchill returned to England as one of most decorated soldiers in British military history. Survived 6 years' war, multiple wounds, months in Nazi camps, adventures too incredible to be true, but perhaps most remarkably, he'd proven that even in mechanized, industrial slaughter of modern warfare, there was still room for individual courage, personal honor, warrior spirit that had once conquered empires with nothing but steel and determination. The end. Years later, when asked why he insisted on fighting with medieval weapons in modern war, Jack Churchill gave answer that perfectly captured his unique approach: "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. Any officer who doesn't understand that warfare is ultimately about courage to face your enemy with honor rather than ability to kill from distance has missed entire point of being soldier." Mad Jack Churchill died peacefully in 1996, age 89, surrounded by family and collection of medieval weapons. He never did learn to appreciate modern firearms.